The Sine Institute of Policy and Politics is American University's incubator for policy innovation. We convene leaders in the academic, public, private, nonprofit, and journalism sectors to engage and promote common ground and nonpartisan solutions. In an evolving world, we seize the opportunity to work on the nation's most pressing challenges through collaboration by experts and top scholars in their field with students in research and scholarship. As part of that goal, the Sine Institute leverages American University's location in our nation's capital, the nexus of government and a growing international business center. We connect diverse perspectives from around the country and around the world with our world-class academics and research, experienced practitioners, and the most politically active student body in the U.S. We stand apart through our focus on the role of business and the nonprofit community in public policy, the rise of the importance of economic regions in the United States, and international policy issues. Our focus is to make an immediate impact at the intersection of policy and politics that leads to real and lasting change. Thank you for joining us as we convene, communicate, and collaborate. And now introducing 2023 Sine Fellow, the Honorable Doug Ducey.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. Welcome to our Sine Institute Fellows Seminar. My name is Ava Gadden. I'm the Administrative Assistant for Sine, and on behalf of the Sine Institute, we're so pleased that you've joined us for this event. The Sine Institute is a laboratory for university-wide collaboration and an incubator for policy innovation, convening the best and brightest in the public, private, academic, and nonprofit sectors, as well as journalism. The Institute is where the brightest minds engage to promote common ground and nonpartisan solutions. It's where American University comes to convene, communicate, and collaborate. Today, we are honored to have our fellow, Governor Doug Ducey, join us again. Governor Doug Ducey was elected as Arizona's 23rd governor in 2014 and re-elected in 2018 with more votes than anyone in state history. He's a former businessman and CEO of Cold Stone Creamery, who today also serves as the chairman of the Republican Governors Association. Governor Ducey has joined us on campus to share his experiences with bringing innovation and an entrepreneurial approach to state government. Through this issue, he will help us navigate how the sectors come together to make real change. Please welcome Governor Doug Ducey.
Thank you, Ava. And only one correction for the record. I served as chairman of the Republican Governors Association. You have to be a sitting governor, but I did do that in my last 2 years. It's good to see everybody again. It's good to see some new faces as well. I'm looking forward to talking to you about modernizing state government in Arizona and how I went about that. And I also want to make it a conversation. So any questions that you have along the way, just go ahead and raise your hands and I'll be able to weave in everything I want to communicate along with answering what's on your mind. And it's both politics and policy that do modernize the state government. So I want to touch on both of those as well as along with talking about the Arizona management system, which was something specific to the state of Arizona that really can be transported or replicated in any other state. But before I talk a little bit about that, I just want to ask again, so I can understand, how many folks here are from Washington, D.C.? How many people born west of the Mississippi? Okay, and the rest are east of the Mississippi. How many of you have developed your political philosophy already? Anybody open-minded and kind of figuring it out? How many of you developed the political philosophy here at American University? Anybody before? And then how many Democrats in the room? Republicans? Independents? Undecided? Okay, good. I only asked that because I didn't develop my political philosophy till I was in college. And it was along the way. I really would have had no idea how to answer any of those questions in high school. And I'm so amazed because I have been able to talk to a lot of young people, how many folks are just so certain at a very young age. And I think you're in a great place to ask questions, to challenge authority, and to, read deeply to determine your own philosophy on that. And I want to help you take advantage of that. So on the management system and modernizing state government, I came from the business sector. That's what I did my entire life. I hadn't thought about running for governor. My training was at Procter and Gamble, and the company I built was Cold Stone Creamery. And I really brought that mindset into state government. When you run for office, and you see this all the time, you have to answer all these questions during the primary and general election. And it's just our process. And I embraced it and navigated those rooms and those waters. And whatever questions you see primary candidates being asked at the state level and in the general election, once they get over that finish line, at least in Arizona, all of a sudden you have 70 days and you inherit 35,000 state employees, a $40 billion combined budget, 220 boards and commissions, and 47 agencies that report directly to you. And nobody has asked you one question about any of these things. And in many ways, being the governor, being the CEO is about all of those issues. That's the government that you are to lead. So we set about on something called the Arizona Management System. And it was really to have a plan as to what was going to happen in state government and how we could bring the agenda that I had ran on to life. So step one was really getting that, if you want to call it cabinet, together. So we brought 47 agency heads into the same room after I had won election to talk about the beginning of this strategic planning process. And these folks weren't used to being brought together in the same room. Many of them did not know each other or had never met. And it was on the second floor of the state capitol. And I still remember walking in that room, and it was rather chilly, very quiet. And I had some prepared remarks, and I just chucked them and basically said, listen, I can hear what everybody in here is thinking. You were here before me, and you'll be here after I'm gone. You're going to outlive me. But we are going to bring a business-like approach to state government, and it was fairly simple. We wanted every agency head to know what their mission was for that agency. We wanted them to have certain metrics that they could determine were the direction for success. We wanted to have transparency on the taxpayers' money. And then basically we just wanted to have it memorialized on, what was accomplished the last 90 days and what do you want to accomplish the next 90 days. You'll know the system more by different names, but if you want to simplify it, that is basically what it was. We were given a real gift in that first month that I was governor. We had a guy that ran the Department of Ways and Means, of Weights and Measures, Director of Weights and Measures. And we hosted the Super Bowl that first month. When we were interviewing the sitting directors, he said, I'm going to shut down Uber and Lyft during the Super Bowl with a sting. So obviously he had not listened to the campaign, and we were able to remove him and put him in the private sector. And it was a way to wake up all of the agency heads that we meant business inside state government. So this idea of putting these measurements in there and then actually moving towards these objectives. And these are things that really affect people's lives. Things like Department of Child Safety. You have kids that are in foster care, but there may not be a home available for them, or there may be an adoptive parent who wants to bring them in. That changes their entire life. This was the most broken agency in the country. So we had to find the agency head first. So for me, it's so much about people selection. And when you find the right person to lead an agency, then they can really help bring that plan to life of what is the mission, what are the metrics that we're going to measure. And you also have to do your best to drive fear out of the organization. There can be a real mindset in large bureaucracies to CYA. Does anybody know what that means? That means to cover your ass. Okay. Some of the mentality that can happen inside a state government is basically, hey, you stay off the front page and we'll be fine. Like, don't embarrass me. So I drive that out and say, if we're going to do this, I know mistakes are going to be made. I mean, if we really want to fix these agencies and make them effective, then we're going to have some trial and error on how we measure these numbers. And if we're not moving the numbers, we're going to have to make adjustments in the strategy of how we do it. And when I inherited the Department of Child Safety, it was the most broken agency in the country. And when something goes bad in child services, it's horrific. Oftentimes a child can be in the care of the wrong adult and there can be a death. And these are things that you just never want to happen. And because the agency was so broken, and really at a point where many pundits and observers thought that it couldn't be fixed, it was very hard to turn around. I was able to find a wonderful young man named Greg McKay, who had served in the police force, had a real heart for these kids, had uncovered that there had been some corruption in the agency, and he had some leadership ability. But it was a hard transition to walk into an agency that large, that spends that amount of state revenues and has that many state employees, and get your arms around it. So it took him quite a while to get it moving in the right direction. We also removed the bureaucrat that was already in the position, and you always pay a price for that politically. So just to make this long story as short as possible, there were bad reviews on what Greg McKay was doing inside the agency. And finally, the Arizona Republic, which is the paper of record, had an editorial that said Greg McKay deserves to be terminated. And that's when he asked for a meeting in my office. He came in and he said, I know it's important what people are saying about the administration in the paper, and I imagine you care about what the Arizona Republic says. So I'm here to offer my resignation so you don't have to terminate me. And I was able to say to him, listen, Greg, first of all, I have all the confidence in the world in you, and I know this is going to take some time to turn this around. Number two, I don't care what the Arizona Republic says. You should read some of the columnists and what they say every day. And number three, there's nobody else in the state who wants this job. It was a brutal job, very difficult. He had a real passion for it. He went on to turn that agency around, probably the most effective child services agency in the country. Hired somebody named Michael Faust, who followed him as the director of that. And we were able to hold that up as a model agency. And we had those kinds of successes across state government, but it was that simplified focus of finding the right leader, building the right team inside the agency, really having an understanding on what the mission was for that agency and knowing that it was different than other agencies. And then finding those metrics. And I read a book when I was elected to the governor's office called How Government Works by John Bernard. I don't know if any of you have read Good to Great by Jim Collins. It's an excellent business book. Most entrepreneurs and CEOs would reference that book. I think How Government Works is the Good to Great for elected officials. They profiled two of the nation's successful governors. One was Rick Snyder in Michigan, a Republican, and the other one was Martin O'Malley in Maryland, a Democrat. Both of them embraced this system of how government works. Now, Martin O'Malley measured different things than Rick Snyder did. So when I transitioned my office to my successor, I encouraged them to keep the Arizona management system in place. But if they wanted to, of course, they can change those measurements. I think it's important that we rebuild trust in our institutions and our government. And there's no better way to do that than to have accountability for these agency heads on what they're to accomplish and then how they deliver that to the people for the taxpayer dollars that are invested. So that's a real overview of modernizing the state government and implementing the Arizona management system. But I want to really open it up to you to any questions you have on what we went through to do that. You can ask about any agency that we have, in addition to the politics that it takes to get some of these things done, because in many ways, governing is campaigning by different means. You know, even though you're the governor and you're the chief executive, you do have to bring people along, and you have to bring agency heads along. And if they don't want to come, then you can make changes. But you have these agencies that predate you, and there's historical reasons for why they are where they are. So what you can affect is not just by waving a magic wand, it's by a real plan and a process. And then once we found out who the best leaders were in these agencies, they really were more than willing to help other agencies move forward as well. It is a real learning curve in terms of leadership and management and advancement. Yes.
You talked about how central understanding the mission was to the turnaround of the Child Protective Services Agency. You also mentioned needing metrics to understand how you are implementing the change you're looking for. How do you set those metrics without allowing those metrics to supplant the mission itself?
That's a great question. Well, first, the mission has got to be above everything else. And to simplify the child services mission, it's got to be to care for these kids that are in a position where either they're in a home where they shouldn't be, or they need a permanent home in their life. And also, this is really where the judgment of government employees is incredibly important, because you could walk into a lot of homes and for whatever reason think a child needs to be removed, and at the same time you don't have a full understanding of the situation. In addition to some of these things, and you've seen this in some movies, and it does happen where neighbors call on other neighbors. Now, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes because there's some kind of spat in the neighborhood. So we wanted to separate that mission from what was most important and overarching to how we would measure success. And success, first and foremost, was to get kids out of congregate care. And that's where they live in state-run facilities with no loving adult caring for them as either a foster or an adoptive parent, so that they can be in more of a family and a permanent setting. And then we wanted to make sure we had the right touch in terms of protecting children from removing children from the parental situation that was harmful to them. And then along with that was due process for a parent in that type of setting. So it did take several iterations till I felt we had the right categories of how we could measure success. But the first thing was just to get kids off of this wait list that we had, where they were literally, you would walk into government buildings and there would be multiple children that were living there. The government is not a very good parent. In fact, it's a poor parent. And there were many loving adults that did want to foster a child and to adopt a child. So how do we do the proper vetting so we can put those kids in safe, warm, and more permanent settings while whatever else is being adjudicated in terms of their case? And one time I thought our child services really shined was during COVID. If you can believe it, other states went virtual. Now, does anybody know who the number one reporters of child abuse are in our states? They're teachers. Teachers see a kid every day. They get to know these kids. One, they can see bruises, but they also can read faces. So many of our kids are not in school. And then we have social workers that are not going to the homes, are either doing this over the phone, or if they have Wi-Fi, Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Google, but not our child service social workers. They went to the homes. And I applaud them. I applaud the leadership of the agency. I think it made a huge difference. It was because they knew what the mission was, and the mission could not be done virtually. So I'd say that's how I would answer those questions. That they should be in, they should synchronize with each other in terms of the mission and the numbers, but the mission has to come first, and it's the numbers that are negotiable. Yes.
I guess you
just tell me your name and where you're from.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Aaron Miller. I'm from Westchester, New York. And I guess you talked about it a little bit earlier, but yeah, how does your plan inadequate education in public schools.
So how does the plan come to education in public schools is the question. So Aaron, here's the thing. We put 11.4 billion additional dollars into K-12 education over 8 years. Education, public education is the #1 investment in every one of our 50 states. There's a lot of people that could stand up in front of you and try to confuse you around the state budget, but I'll simplify it for you. The state budget does 3 things. It educates, it medicates, and it incarcerates. That's 97% of it. And K-12 education, along with universities, is over 50% of the state budget. With all that being said, the governor is not in charge of public education. The governor is in charge of the state, so that comes with it. But you have to work with the superintendent of public instruction. You have to work with, in Arizona, hundreds of school districts that all have their own superintendent and have their own plans. And in many ways, this is what has made K-12 education really work in the United States. It's really calcified over the last several decades. I believe that K-12 education has flatlined in our country, and there's all kinds of numbers to prove that out. So we brought a lot of innovation to K-12 to try to break up the bureaucracy. How many of you went to a K-12 public school? Anybody go to a charter school? Anybody go to a Catholic or private school? So a charter school is a public school with private management, meaning that it's open to all, first come, first serve. But somebody like me, who hasn't studied education, who doesn't have a teacher's certificate, could go and open up the school and say, I've got a better idea. Now, it's completely voluntary if you want to go there. No one is compelled to go there. But we've seen a lot of great ideas come from the charter schools in Arizona. We have 525 charter schools. They educate over 220,000 children, nearly 20% of our state's public school universe. If you take those 220,000 kids, that's the #1 state in the country for academic achievement. They expect more. I could not be hired before I changed the law. I could not be hired in an Arizona public school to teach civics or state government because I don't have a teacher's certificate. In a charter school, I could be hired. It's completely up to the principal and the superintendent. We changed the law in Arizona so that we could let principals and superintendents make those decisions on who should be to the front of the classroom, because we have a real issue with teacher shortages, and not just in Arizona. There's 48 other governors that could be here giving this discussion. And then the thing that I'm most proud of, but it's yet to be proven out, is something called educational savings accounts. Now, many of our schools in Arizona are excellent. And if you're in one of those schools, you don't want to find another school. But I was able to send my kids to a Catholic school. So I had a choice. There are other people that can move from one zip code to a better zip code to get into the right school district. So they have a choice. I think if you believe in equality in this country, everyone should have a choice. So we passed a law called universal ESAs, educational savings accounts. So you have access to your taxpayer dollars should you choose to send your child to another school. And it's not means tested. It's available to everyone. It puts the parent in charge of the education. And I think the parent knows best by and large. There's always an exception and there's always a case when they don't. But if a kid is trapped inside a failing school, if a child is being bullied in a school and needs a change of scenery right now, it's the parent that knows that. That's what's available in Arizona. You're going to see that same law pass in places like Iowa, Florida, Texas, Utah, and other states around the country. I think it's going to be a great innovation to K-12. And I'm someone who believes in bottom up versus top down. And since no one in a state is truly responsible for K-12 education. It's a combination of government agencies. To put the parent in charge of their child's education will bring a lot of positives. And I think not only what we already have available, but we'll watch 1,000 flowers bloom around this idea.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
So Linda Daniels, I'm London. I think that's all what you said you wanted to know. But just piggyback off some of the stuff that you said in terms of the education, putting parents in charge. So again, yes, having them use their tax dollars to go to a private school or something of that nature. But what about the public schools that are failing? Don't we want them to not fail? So don't we want to continue to put money in that school? So I'm just wondering, even if the dollars are taken out, but we still have the school over here failing. So I'm just kind of wondering, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a very fair question. It's around not only taking a child out of a public school and putting them into an alternative, but what about our kids that are trapped in failing public schools? And we worked very hard on this in Arizona, and I think every governor makes a real attempt here. One anecdote on this is the person that partnered on this project was somebody named Janelle Wood. And Janelle leads the African or the Black Mothers Forum. And Janelle and I didn't get off to a good start. She came to see me in the summer of 2020. She wasn't happy with some of the things I was doing around social unrest. We had called in the National Guard and we had put out a curfew. But I just didn't, Phoenix is the 5th largest metropolitan city in the country, and I didn't want to see what was happening in other cities happen in Phoenix. She wanted to make certain that children and adults could peacefully protest, and we found a way through that. It wasn't the best of meetings, but I could tell her heart was in the right place, and we settled on working together on something around school choice. That was where she sat next to the First Lady in my last State of the State. And I said from the podium that 50 years ago, politicians stood in the schoolhouse door and wouldn't let minorities in. Today, union-backed politicians stand in the schoolhouse door and won't let minorities out. These kids are trapped in failing public schools. It's time to set these families free. So many folks think that the answer to the problem is just more money into K-12 education. And if that was the answer, I think we would have solved this in Arizona with $11.4 billion additional invested since 2015. So I don't think we have a lot of failing public schools, but where we do have a failing public school, one, we have to give that kid the opportunity to get into a productive classroom today, right now. I mean, what grade doesn't matter of those 12 years, especially I would say in terms of K-8 especially, because we do have a lot of choice in Arizona. And then I would like to find a way that we can turn these failing schools around. In a charter school, if they're not achieving to a certain metric at 3 years, we shut them down. They're out of business. These failing K-12 schools have been there for decades. There's no way, at least that we could find under the law, to shut them down or to remove the principal or the superintendent. So this is a way to give the parents the choice and to exercise the option to get their kids in a place that they feel they're being productive and learning something of value immediately. It doesn't mean it shouldn't be dealt with. I'm all ears to the solution. Yes.
I'm Lorenzo. I'm from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I want to ask, how did you combine your business experience with public administration, given there are different metrics and how success is evaluated? And in working with different department heads and cabinet officials, what are some moments that you had to step in and maybe take more hands-on role as much as you could?
Mm-hmm. It's a really good question, because I think that oftentimes people that are in the business world will think that they're smarter than people that are in the public policy world. And in the business world, there really is just one metric that measures success. Now, there's many other metrics, but it is a net profit number. And if you hit a net profit number, you are going to be in business. Okay. You may be wildly successful and make an incredible amount of money, depending on how much you can drive that number. In public policy, it's never just one number, and it's always much more complex. And I think the Department of Child Services is one, much like the Department of Transportation. Think of everything that a Department of Transportation does, from issuing driver's licenses to building roads and bridges and maintaining infrastructure inside a state. So each of these agencies are going to have multiple numbers in terms of how they can point to success and competency. And that's where the mindset changes from a business sector where you are focused on that net profit number to the outputs that come from good public policy, and how do you serve the citizen. So what does the citizen need? What does the citizen value? And how will the department measure its success around that? And I think once you can get the agency heads and their senior management on that type of focus, then you're going to come up with some metrics that may not be the right metrics long term, but you can begin in that direction. And I think it's also a way to build confidence back in the agency, to increase employee engagement in terms of what really works. And when you aren't hitting those numbers, or you're not doing the right things to move the ball, that's where you have to drive out that fear of, I said, rather than being CYA, of what adjustments do we need to make? And that's why I like to look in 90-day timeframes, because it really gives somebody an opportunity to implement and to see if they're headed in the right direction. And a lot of that is very similar to how you would run a business. The idea of a 90-day time frame, of settling on a metric in the business world that would be a metric that would drive net profit, or would be the one that would determine financial success for the organization. But it's different in public policy, because you're using taxpayer dollars, federal dollars from the federal government. They're all taxpayer dollars. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Building off of this, what were some of the things that you felt did translate well from your experience in the private sector to the governor's mansion, and which did you have to leave behind?
Everything from the private sector translated. I think to be a leader in any setting when you run for governor is the training that you need. So I always say to young people, you're very fortunate if you're governor, because you get to work with some of the most talented young people in the state. They're attracted to public policy. Many of them want to work in the governor's office, or they want to intern in the governor's office. There's also an afternoon every year where I was able to talk to every intern in state government, those that were down at the state legislature, the Supreme Court, and inside the judiciary system, and then of course in the executive branch as well. And I really encourage them that if they did want to grow up someday and be governor, or a state legislator, or a congressman or woman or senator, to go out and do something else, to build a business, to turn a school around, or to join the military, to get some subject matter expertise outside of politics. Because the objective isn't to win the election and win re-election. That's not where the skill is. The skill is in what you do once you win election. Now, for me, being governor is basically being a CEO, a chief executive officer of the state. So that business training was very helpful. What do you do when you lead a company? Well, you set a vision, you chart a course, you pick the people, you make the tough decisions. And being governor is very similar to that, if not identical. You don't have a board of directors as governor. I mean, you report to the people, and the people can be tough, and that's okay. That's what you signed up for. Yes.
I'm Madeline. I'm from Denver, Colorado. And without getting into too much of like Colorado politics, there's kind of this push towards modernization, but also this push against it. And I was kind of wondering like how you handled that and also like what advice you would give other governors or other politicians and kind of like moving forward and pushing government forward.
Thanks for bringing up a specific state, Madeline. I think that's, I know almost every governor in the country. I've been out of office, so the incoming freshmen may be people that I haven't met, but I've got to know Jared Polis rather well. And he comes from the private sector, very successful businessman. And I think that idea of driving modernization inside state government is something that only a governor can do. There's no real lobby out there to do it. Many people would not see it as a good use of taxpayer dollars. And as the executive, if you're strong-willed and convicted on what you want to accomplish, you can get most of it done. You can't get everything you want, but you can get anything you want. And if that's important to Governor Polis, then he can do that. But you do have to make the case for that, both in the public sector. And then I think some of the most skilled negotiators are those that know how to negotiate internally. And my toughest challenge was in our existing state government, that I was serious about this, that this just wasn't a press conference. And it really was those weekly meetings around the planning process that had some light bulbs go off, some leaders really buy in to what we were doing. And then I made sure to profile who was really making it work. I gave a lot of leash to anyone that was trying to make it work, and anyone that wasn't on board was no longer in state government. Yes, Charles.
Charles Simon of upstate New York and Sine Political Institute. I want to ask like a couple of questions that are all linked together. I want to talk more about specifically the gentleman who was working for the child service.
DCS.
Yes, the DCS. And that just got me thinking about a couple of questions. My first one would be, they all have to do with how, like what you did, like the exact, like the actions that you took. I want to ask, knowing that whenever there is like a government that is not functioning well or it's in debt, one of the first things that governors do is to cut spending, lower spending, et cetera, et cetera. I was just wondering if there were any other sort of actions that you took that helped, that weren't, just the lowering of spending. And I also was wondering more about the appointing of individuals to said agencies, and I was wondering what was most important to you, their experience, their agreement with your plans for the state, or their general popularity?
So great questions across the board. I'm going to try to touch on each one of them. All right. So yes, balancing a budget is just not about cutting spending, not at all. And I think I shared with you the secret to balancing a budget. It's the same as what you do with your own personal budget and what every small business person does. We just spent less than what we brought in. But first, we did go through the budget page by page and line by line. And we found agencies that had up to $100 million laying around in funds. And we had a $1 billion deficit. So these are opportunities where you're 10% of the way there. Now, we did have to make some tough decisions to balance that budget, but there oftentimes is some kind of waste or bloat in an agency. I think the most important thing in any agency are the people that are in it. They're the ones that get things done. We put on a hiring freeze. Now, this doesn't mean that we wouldn't hire someone. We needed people for Department of Child Safety. We need people to be state troopers. But in a lot of these agencies, because they had been around for so long and they really had never been reviewed, if Charles were to quit or retire, they would just hire someone to do Charles's job. There was no thought of how do we use technology or a better system to combine workload. In addition, what workload do we not need? I mean, under this new metric. So we had people come in and justify hiring someone. We had 24% of the state's workforce that was eligible for retirement in the first 4 years. So wow, is it expensive to hire someone and bring them on? And these are not done with anything but taxpayer dollars. So every time we were able to have someone that retired and we were able to use a computer system or technology to replace that job, we were able to leave more money into taxpayers' pockets and allow those jobs to be created in the private sector. So it wasn't that we were slashing jobs, it was that we were making the government smaller, more efficient and effective, and allowing the private sector to grow. And did the private sector ever grow? We were able to lower taxes every year. I was governor. Today, Arizona has the lowest flat tax in the nation. And every time we lowered taxes, we had more taxpayers moving to the state. So it's just not simply about cutting and slashing and burning. It can't be about that. Otherwise, it will really backfire on you. It's got to be about making thoughtful, difficult decisions in terms of tightening the belt. And then once the budget heals, you have to come back and replenish those investments and expect a return on those investments as well. I think there's a lot of things that you can do by just saying, let's slow down. Let's ask why we're doing it this way. You know, it's really tough in government. If you think about the appropriations process, to find appropriations to buy people stuff like computers, yet you see the productivity that comes with that. And that's why you have to make the case and plan for that. And I also think you have to dig deep in terms of agencies and where the money is and find that, and not let some of these kingdoms that can be built to agency heads or certain purposes that have long ago expired exist. Did I get all of it?
I also asked about like what mattered the most to you when hiring like
yes.
an agency head, like how much they agree with you, their popularity amongst like people or like their qualifications.
So the popularity didn't matter at all. Okay, not at all. I do want to say, if you're going to be a leader, you have to work with others. All right, so that ability to build a team, to have trust and authenticity, but that's not always the most popular person in the room. And those leadership skills and ability are something I think you learn over the course of time. I had a lot of people from the private sector and the business world that wanted to help me get into the governor's office, but they didn't want to come work with me in the governor's office. So I had to find very capable leaders inside state government or that wanted to come into state government. Now, there are really good people in state government. And we had a couple, and this is off the top of my head, I mentioned Greg McKay and Mike Faust, but we had an individual named Tom Betlak who ran our Medicaid, we call it Access, Arizona Healthcare Cost Containment System. This was an incredible leader inside state government. Kara Christ ran our Department of Health Services. So oftentimes they could help me identify other good leaders that were more at the middle management level, but had been stifled because a bureaucrat might have been in place and not even said to them, wait their turn. They just hadn't been allowed to blossom. So we really did a lot of testing with predictive index on where somebody falls in terms of their ability to lead, their sense of urgency, their ability to work well with others, and where they would be in terms of being innovative versus being rule breaking. And it's not perfect, but it does help you make better decisions on building management teams. And then really the proof is in the pudding with a leader. I don't know how many people are college football fans, but you often see heroic offensive coordinators or defensive coordinators that get the head coaching position and they fail because it is a different position. So there's a great supporting cast that any leader needs. And sometimes in that supporting cast, there's someone that can be the next leader, but sometimes that's where the person should be, is in the supporting cast. It's not Um, it's not a judgment of the individual, it's a judgment for the organization. Really, what's the goal and what's your role? So I wouldn't say there's any dominant feature there. It's about the people selection. And then oftentimes you see people grow into the position. Greg McKay was overwhelmed as the leader of the Department of Child Services, and he went on to be one of the most confident subject matter experts in the world on the same issue in less than 18 months. But he paid the price. He showed up every day. He did the hard work. And it was the work of development, personal development.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Going off of his question, Arizona filled with like Democrats, independents, Republicans. I think especially in this last election, independents were really to play. So looking at people to fill your cabinet, how do you look at it not to, like when politics is more or less thrown at everything and anything and everything could be political? How did you get that aside and just talk to the person, not as a Democrat, not as a Republican, not as an independent, but as someone who wants to work and serve the state?
Great question, Tyler. This was new to me because I had never been in elective office. Actually, I was a homeroom representative in 5th grade at Pleasant Salem grade school. But then I ran for state treasurer, and it's a statewide office, constitutional office, third in line to the governor. I won. So I'm the state treasurer, and I went in, and the deputy said, "Do you want to run a party check on all of the employees?" And I said, "What's a party check?" He said, "Well, so you know who's a Republican and who's a Democrat in the office." And I said, "No, I don't want to do that." I said, "Is there anybody that shouldn't be in the office?" And he said, "No, this is a very good team and they're highly skilled." And I said, "Okay, well, that's how we're going to go about it." So I never in anything in public sector leadership pulled out anybody's party registration. And I imagine in some of the agency heads that I will brag on, that many of them probably voted against me twice. But they agreed with the mission and they agreed with what we wanted to do. I don't want to get this guy in trouble, but a guy named Ben Henderson, who was our deputy chief operating officer and reported to Daniel Ruiz, who was our chief operating officer. I think he came in under Henry Darwin. He's now in Jared Polis's administration as chief operating officer, and we knew he was a Democrat the whole time. But he was for effective government, and he was very good at what he does. And I do think effective government is not about being a Republican or a Democrat. You guys, I don't watch South Park. But my boys do, and there's one meme that they showed me of South Park, and they're at the Republican National Convention, and they're holding up a sign that says, "We don't like people." And then they go to the Democrat National Convention, and they're holding up a sign that says, "We can't govern." Neither are necessarily true, but the focus on governing is actually making these agencies work. And if that's what you were on board for, and I was going to come at it with more of a world view that I believed in a bottom up type philosophy rather than a top down, then we were going to get along fine. Yes.
So I coordinated before my name's Don McGotti, originally from the suburbs of Chicago.
What suburb?
Elmhurst.
Okay.
Earlier you mentioned the looking at
Where'd you go to high school?
York Community High School.
Okay. All right.
Being innovative versus being rule breaking is working in bureaucracy. Can you talk a little bit more about the philosophy?
So have any of you taken like a Myers-Briggs test or predictive index or DISC? It's all the same behavioral science by and large. You know, some people are more extroverted than introverted. Some people are more dominant in terms of give me the ball, I want to lead. Some people have better human touch in terms of empathy and working with others. And then I think the fourth category is around following the rules. And I've always tried to look for a mix from if you are a complete rule follower in something like state government with all of the manuals and bureaucracy, oftentimes you can be handcuffed. And I used to say this of good attorneys, there are deal breakers and deal makers. Attorneys are trained to see all of the liability that's there. So the easiest answer is always no, that can't be done. Well, what you want to find is somebody who says, this is how it can be done legally, ethically, and morally. And I think that's the same way in any position. If you're solving problems, is how can you bring innovation without drawing outside the lines, without cheating, without stealing, without doing something that's a clear disregard for the law. And that's very rare. I mean, that does happen here and there, but that's very rare. But some people, I always like to set a culture in every senior staff meeting where I would want to begin with the most junior person in the room, because I didn't want there to be any wrong answers. And when we would talk about different policies that we could have, is let's get all the ideas on the table. Let's get every possible idea there. And then what are the best ideas? One are the ones that will be most effective. Now, if you're just following the rules in something like state government or a large corporation, it's very hard to have movement. But if you can bring some kind of creativity, innovation, flexibility, ability to get others to share those ideas, and then have the knack for what's the best idea, that's the way to really move things forward. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Do you know where you are on that metric?
No, I haven't taken one in a while.
I think those are really good, because to know your own strengths, I know for myself, I'm someone that decisions come very easy. So I will make a decision, but the weakness there is that you can make the wrong decision. So the best way to get good at making decisions is make more decisions, because the best way to get it right is to first get it wrong. Okay, but you're making decisions now. Hopefully you accumulate some wisdom and knowledge and instinct along the way where your decisions will be better. But it's also important as a leader to have people around your table that will say, time out, or have we thought this through? And for me to ask for that, what could go wrong here? What are we not seeing? What more information do we need? You're never, if you're going to be a leader of a large organization and you're going to get things done, you're never going to have 100% of the inputs necessary to make the decision. Those decisions are made well beneath you at other places in the organization. When it gets to the 9th floor and to the governor's office, no one else has made this decision. And you're probably at best going to have 55 to 60% of the information to make a decision. So to be thoughtful in that is very important. These decisions have consequences. Just like every law has a consequence. Oftentimes people don't see the unintended consequence of the law that they passed. And once it's there, it's very rare that a law is repealed. If you think about the amount of laws that are on our books, and those are on the legislature and of course the governor for signing them. And we looked at each one of those laws as a decision as well, because of course you have the power of the veto. Anybody else? Yes.
I feel I should probably ask if how we are on time, just because I have a question I want to ask, but it is a bit of. All right.
Go ahead.
All right. Okay. I figured, I think it's time I ask a little critical questions here. So I want to go back to earlier when you were talking about the system in which brains a little. So I want to go back to when you were talking about the system in which taxpayers could access their taxes and use them to go to different schools in different areas.
Yes.
So generally, since not everyone pays the exact same amount of taxes, some people are going to have less tax money or more tax money. And therefore, I'm a little worried on if people have more access, if some might have more access to better quality schools than others based on how much taxes they pay. And I was wondering how school taxes are set up and how they work in Arizona, and if there are any actions or things done to prevent this sort of issue, if there is an issue at all.
Yeah, it's a very fair critique, to be certain, because we were first in the nation. There are going to be adjustments and reforms that are necessary. Ours is universal, so it's for every child in the state. Each one has access to the same exact amount of dollars. Okay, it's about $7,500. I would like to put more money in that across the board, because some of the better, more preferable schools cost a little more than that, but it was a good start and a healthy first step. We actually passed a law in 2017 that I liked a little bit better. And what that law was universal school choice, but only for 5,000 kids a year. Okay, so we would have done it 5,000 kids a year for 6 years. We would have had 30,000 kids in the program. I still would have been governor. I don't think it's fair that 30,000 kids get it and the rest of the kids don't. But it would have allowed us along the way to see what was working, what wasn't working, and what adjustments we made before it became universal. Yeah, I'm not in the business of pointing out things that I think the founders could have done better, because I think they set things up pretty well. And then we've got 250 years of continual improvement to prove it. But I don't think they could have ever imagined the amount of laws that would be passed by the United States Congress and by our state legislatures. I wish these laws had sunsets, because if it's a good law, we're going to pass it again. And there'll be immense pressure on the legislature to pass it and the governor to sign it. But if it's one of these laws with unintended consequences that no one can ever figure out how it got on the books, or it's stifling innovation, or it's stopping or protecting a special interest, which is now fully invested on only protecting that law, well, it would go away. And I think that that's part of the issue, is that we need to get more of a posture of reform in our country. We have a lot of things that are working. We all know the things that aren't working, but those things can be reformed and reorganized. Anybody else? Yes.
So keeping in the realm of education, when you share a statistic like your charter schools, if they were their own state, they would be number one.
Yes.
I'm sure you try to bring some of these superintendents and principals that they've been in the depressed school areas where it's been decades of stagnation, nothing's improved. Why, in your view, would you say maybe they didn't want to, I don't know if it's fair to say they didn't try to learn, or just meet, or try to, I don't want to say make an effort, because I don't want to say that they're not, but in bringing those two groups together, what reasons would you see why there hasn't been that incremental improvement maybe on the public side?
It's a great question, and it's one that every governor is challenged with in the country. And I think by and large, most of the people that I worked with in public K-12 education were people that were absolutely committed to the mission of the kids and improvement inside the classroom. The teachers union, not so much. The teachers, yes, but the union was a political organization. It didn't like choice. I will tell you, we had a crisis in terms of pay in Arizona. And we put more money into K-12 education every year that I came into office. I inherited a constitutional crisis in terms of a lawsuit that loomed over the state legislature that we settled by putting an additional $3.5 billion into K-12 education through a referendum. So right from the get-go, we were into solving problems. We needed to get more pay to teachers. We put together a 20% pay raise, 20 by 2020 is what we called it. And it was in a crisis in the 2018 cycle. Every Democrat in our legislature voted against it. And the teachers union was against the 20% pay raise. So these are some of the politics that come with what happens at the state level. And this is why I like choice, is I don't think that K-12 education should be a partisan issue. Janelle Wood, who sat next to Angela Ducey in the last state of the state, is a registered Democrat who believes in school choice. All of the African American pastors that signed on to our school choice plan and program are Democrats. Yet not one Democrat voted for ESAs or increasing teacher pay. In Arizona, there's a really, I think, a future superstar state legislator right now that was elected in this last cycle named Matt Grass. He happened to be my budget director for 5.5 years, and he ran on a platform of an immediate $10,000 raise to every teacher in the state. He can't get a Democrat vote. Is that right, Dan?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, he cannot get a Democrat vote. So these are things that are maddening and frustrating, and why I believe in choice, because then you put the parent in charge, you allow these communities to build. And I also think it's a great opportunity for whatever party embraces this choice initiative is to be the parents' party, to be on the side of what the parents need and want. And I think our teachers should be paid more. We've got an incredible amount of dollars washing through our K-12 education system. Yes, we do need administration. Yes, we do need some bureaucracy, but that should not be where the lion's share of the dollars are. The lion's share of the dollars should go to teachers and proper infrastructure. And these don't have to be monuments. I mean, I think some of our schools look like public universities in their K-12 schools. I'd much rather see the dollars going into the teachers and that support staff. Let's go with the last question. Anybody? Go ahead, Charles.
All right, I'm sorry I've been taking up a lot of the questions here. What would you say, I don't know if this is the most appropriate, because I don't want to have you answer a question that like may piss off a former employee of yours. What would you say was the most surprising budget what would you say is the most surprising budget upset, where it's like what agency had like the most incomprehensible amount of money towards it? Like what didn't make, what was the thing when looking over your budget that did not make sense at all?
Okay, I'll give you two real quick anecdotes that I think are the things that were most memorable to me and real learning experiences, because you run for office, you win the office, but then you actually have to do the job. And the job is in the public sphere, and there is an incredible amount of scrutiny, especially if you are a conservative Republican who ran as a business person and wants to balance the budget and says things like, let's kickstart the economy, and I built a business, now I want to shrink a government and grow an economy. So in that first year, we did have the $1 billion deficit. There's not a constitutional requirement to balance the budget. So I think most people thought that I just punt on that and just let the deficit go. But I brought legislators up to my office and said, this is what I ran on, and we're going to balance this budget. We had the shortest session in Arizona state history. Now we've only been around since 1912, but over 100 years. And it was the shortest session because I'm like, I know you have things that you want, but we have no money. So we're going to balance this budget. We're going to make the tough decisions. You can blame me for it. and we'll come back next year. And we did that. And that was a real surprise because it actually worked. Sometimes you have a plan and it's like Mike Tyson says, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Well, on this one, it is actually easier to run a legislative session when you don't have any money. In my last year, we had a $5 billion surplus. So everybody sees their pet project in that surplus, and everybody in the legislature wants that money. So that's the opposite of my first year. And the pleasant surprise there was we had no chance for ESAs. I was getting a little worried that I was torturing my senior staff, because I don't know if you've ever seen the musical Hamilton or listened to the songs, but we didn't have the votes. All right. And if you don't have the votes, you just simply can't get it done. And we knew there was not one Democrat that was going to vote for school choice. The teachers union was 100% against it. But we had 2 Republicans that we had worked, we had brought up to the office, we had tried to persuade, we had tried to twist the arm. We were close to trying to do whatever we could to get these votes. And it was a no. And it turned into a hell no. But as the session went on and on and on, there were other conflicts that happened. And there was something called Prop 400. Prop 400 is something I think will get done in Arizona, but it didn't need to get done in my session. It can be done in this session or even the next session. A lot of folks, a lot of the special interests had moved it forward. And one of our hell no's didn't want to see Prop 400 pass. When my team came to me on this, I said, what's Prop 400? No one had even briefed me on it. And I said, well, Prop 400 can pass next year, or the year after. Whoever my successor is going to sign that. What we want is school choice. So I said, if this is me about being a no on Prop 400 to get a yes on the biggest win over 8 years, I'm a no. Well, that put us 1 vote away. The pressure on this was immense. And all of a sudden, we were signing it into law, where it had no chance 10 days earlier. So I think the founders were very prescient when they wrote in our founding document, the first line is in the course of human events. To remember, we're dealing with human beings and things can change for good or for ill. In both of those examples, it was for good, but it was a little bit of patience. It was some time invested and then some good luck. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much again, Governor Ducey, for joining us today. If you have any interest in coming back, which I certainly hope that you do, to seeing more of Governor's seminars, we have another seminar and we have a career conversation coming up. So when you want to ask all the questions like, how'd you get there, all that kind of stuff, that will be for the career conversation, which will be happening in, I believe, April. You have they're on the table in front of you. I don't know why I tried to guess. Have a wonderful day. Thank you so much. And we hope to see you back.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, sir.